No, it's not all right, and it's never going to be all right. And that's Larry Hall.
Nice.
This is Jen.
This is Becky.
This is Too Close to Home, and we're back.
Back, baby.
And of course, we're going to talk about Larry Hall. But before we get into our subject, let's talk about our sources. We got a lot. Blackbird, the book by James Keenan Hillel Levin. Blackbird on Apple TV, which is a miniseries. Wikipedia, Medium, United States versus Hall, 1996, United States Court of Appeals, 7th Circuit. Department of Psychology at Radford University. Case Text, Justia Law. Case Mine, JimmyKeen.info, because he has his own website, of course. And CNN.
Nice. Lots of resources.
I mean, I was really trying to go through it. If the source material sounds familiar, it's because the excellent miniseries Blackbird was based on this story. It's on Apple TV, and it stars the fucking gorgeous Taron Egerton, who played Elton John in his musical. Well, I mean, Elton John is a musical.
I was going to say
Okay,
his
he's
life
the definition.
is a musical.
And Paul Walker Hauser. They're both extremely talented actors. They did such a good job in picking them to represent the real life people. The story in the show is dark, but nonetheless, they did leave out some details. And my being curious cat, I immediately IMDb'd and Wikipedia the story to learn more, which I do about everything in my life.
Same.
If it's not on Wikipedia, it's not on IMDb, I'm not ready to watch it. I'm not ready to consume it. I need to have some hard facts, okay?
I am the same.
I need to know how tall they are. I need to know how old they are.
I don't need
Are
to
they
know that, but I
married?
need to know how much of this is accurate and how much of it is bullshit.
Yeah.
And then I just rabbit hole from there.
More and more
Yes.
and more. And so I added it to my list of crimes to podcast about because it had just recently come out. And usually when something recently comes out or a case is in the middle of like court, I don't want to talk about it. It's too saturated right now. So I was on Audible, just meandering around, and I found Blackbird, and it came up again. I was like, oh, perfect timing. Let's do this. And so I began listening, and I was enthralled into the book. I have been trying to listen to a book, and then I come back and I start my outline. And the weirdest thing happened is I began my outline for this story September 20th, and that's the anniversary of the disappearance of Jessica Roach, which Mr. Hall had a good little bit of something to do with. So let's talk about Larry Hall. His parents were Robert and Era Bernice Hall of Wabash, Indiana. It's a tiny little town north of Indianapolis, Indiana. So I've never been to Indiana. See, obviously, I've never been there. So I don't know even where. I can't even point that out on a map. Sorry.
Same. Don't think I've ever been to that state.
Robert was a sexton, which means he was a caretaker for a cemetery, and the Falls Cemetery was his domain in Wabash. He not only worked there, but the entire family resided in Falls Cemetery sexton's house. It was at the corner of the cemetery, and it had a lot of grounds, and it's unglamorous work to bury bodies and everything, but it also paid pretty damn well.
It seems like a good job to me. I don't have to deal with anybody talking back. They're not happy with how I lowered them in the ground, any of that. They don't say shit.
Are you a happy customer? Yeah? Okay, thanks.
But you also don't get any 5-star reviews. So.
No. Well, I mean, what if you got possession of the... No, never mind. That's just hacking, and we're not even going into that. Anyways, Robert was known to be a tall, gruff man, and he would literally be able to tear a phone book in half. Which, I mean, it was a small town, so it can't have been that big of a phone book. But
I'm impressed.
for all those youngsters who don't know what phone books are,
Oh, true.
take a minute and goggle it, okay? I don't have time to explain this. Era, who went by her middle name Bernice, was a heavyweight woman with a sharp tongue and pointed face. Jimmy pointed at me. That would be me. It would be me. Wait till you hear about her. Although Bernice had a teenage daughter from a previous marriage, when she became pregnant, it was odd as both Robert and Bernice were considered quote unquote elderly for parents, as he was in his 40s and she was in her 30s. Which by then everyone was like, 15, you're old enough. You better start popping out those babies before that uterus of yours atrophies, you know.
That's what they used to think.
Regardless, Bernice was pregnant with twins, and the doctors told her that due to age and it being multiple children, her pregnancy and birth were to be precarious and could possibly result in a lot of complications. One of those complications did arise, and it's monochorionic twins. They're identical twins who share a single placenta. Later on, after giving birth, they would realize that Larry suffered from twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome, also known as fetal syndrome.
I don't know what the fuck that is.
Fetal.
Fiddle faddle.
Tomato. TTTS occurs in pregnancies where twins share one placenta. The vessel connections in the placenta are not evenly dispersed, and there's an imbalance of the blood exchange between the twins. So one twin, the donor twin, will give away more blood than it receives, and it runs the risk of malnourishment and organ failure. The recipient twin receives too much blood, and it was
Susceptible.
Yep.
I got you. I always got your back, girl.
Thank you. To overwork of the heart and other cardiac complications. Regardless, both twins would be born December 11th, 1962, and Larry would emerge from the womb undersized and blue, so he was rushed to the NICU where he nearly died. Because of the complications of TTTS, most identical twins that actually survive, pregnancy or gestation and baby and birth or whatever, they end up looking completely different from their identical twin. They look even more different than fraternal twins do. So there wasn't really a whole lot of similarities. And so Larry would actually grow up to be short, pudgy. He had a low IQ. He wasn't very well rounded. Gary, his brother, was tall, slender, smart, apparently good looking. Got along with the ladies.
One is living the dream and the other is...
It's like Danny DeVito in Twins. You know what I mean?
Nice.
Basically, it's twins. I would hate to be the Danny DeVito of that twin. You know what I mean?
I don't know. He's pretty amazing.
I do love some Danny.
Yeah.
As the twins grew, the parasitic reliance from their time in the womb flipped, with Larry relying on Gary. They stuck close to each other, with Gary taking care of Larry. Feels like a really bad rhyme.
It really does.
Gary made friends and made plans, and Larry would just tag along, just like any other little brother. Their parents, despite their modest means, would dote on the boys with childhood friends speaking on their childhood of privilege. They would have dirt bikes, nice toys, things that other families couldn't afford. But also, their family was weird. His mom was a severe hoarder, and she would have these rummage sales all the time. And that's the only thing she would do is these rummage sales and then sit on the couch and yell at people. She didn't even cook or anything like that. She was just like there.
Just sitting around yelling at people?
Just sitting, basically what I do.
Me up.
It's what I do to Jimmy. Only my OCD won't let me hoard.
No, mine neither.
I just hoard mental disability. Okay.
Same.
Her kids were a bit coddled, one might say. I mean, I guess late in life, and they had trouble with pregnancy and birth. I'm sure she was like, "Oh, my babies." They couldn't do no wrong in her eyes. But as they grew a little bit older, they became assholes from this coddling.
Of
probably.
course, always.
And they would terrorize the town. They loved to play pranks, such as they put fishing line on a wallet and hide in the bushes and pull the string, just like the guy go, "You almost hit it."
Larry Moe and Curly here.
Right. They also had a dummy that they dress up and throw in a ditch. And they would listen to their police scanner and wait for somebody to call it in, run out there, grab the body and hide it, and then just do it over and over again all fucking night long.
That does sound like fun.
And so it even led to damage of property, like store windows one time. It was a whole crew of the boys, both the Hall boys and then their friends. And so they got them all down to the police station. They're interrogating him. And apparently they held out for a real long time until Larry cracked because he was trying to please the police officer, supposedly.
Always one weak link.
Always one weak link.
Deny.
And this is something that he would later become known for, is his false confessions. It cost $500 for damage, and the boys would just have to work it off. Larry's mother felt like they got unjustly punished and that her boys didn't do a damn thing wrong.
Of course they didn't. Not them little angel babies.
No, not these horrible students that basically fucked around and focused more on the interest in hot rods. Not those babies.
Not those babies.
Larry was antisocial in school, and he had a low IQ and was teased for being slower than other children and also for having a speech impediment because kids are cruel.
They are
They were cruel then,
assholes.
and they're cruel fucking now. And
Mhm.
there's times that I've thought about punching a kid in the throat.
Same.
I've never done it.
Not yet.
Not yet. Yet being the operative word, okay?
Yes.
Fuck around, you find out.
You hit the nail on the head there.
Larry loved all things automotive, and this would follow him into adulthood. He would help build out vehicles, and he would end up taking some vocational courses to help learn more about how to fix vehicles and, all that. He didn't use it for a job, though. He just used it for his own personal use. Like, he went to college to learn how to fix cars.
To fix his own?
To fix his own shit.
That's it?
That's it.
Okay. Do you, boo?
He was specifically a huge fan of Chrysler and Mopar products. So he loved Dodge, loved Chrysler. The brothers didn't have much money, so they would just be able to get the vehicles running. And sometimes they wouldn't even have the money to buy the gas to run them. As a part of hot rod culture, there's a lot of run a mouse and showing off their vehicles to girls. And while Larry wasn't versed in the latter two, Gary was quite successful with women and talking shit, especially after they graduated in 1981. This would be seen as annoying to Larry because he was the third wheel at all times. It was Gary, his girlfriend, and Larry. Larry would always be tagging along. And at some point, shit gets awkward, I'm sure.
I'm sure.
Things would get worse for the Hall family because in 1984, the elder Hall lost his job as a sexton, and in turn, the only home the boys had ever known. The board for the cemetery, they had heard about his drinking and that he was drinking on the job, and they were like, all right, but you gotta cut that shit out. And then he started burying the wrong bodies in the wrong plots. And they were like, all right, now we can't ignore this.
He was drinking a lot.
You son was blackout drunk.
Asshole. It's good. Just throw someone in there.
They don't know.
I mean,
what
if
they gonna do? Dig him up?
Doesn't matter.
Exactly.
Just kidding.
That's exactly what I was just thinking. I was like, these people probably think I'm like all about it. Like, fuck your body. I love both of y'all. And so Robert was 62 and a terrible alcoholic, like we said. So it wasn't like he was going to go out and get a new career. So they settled in this shitty little shack inside town. And Gary was like, nah, dog, I'm good. And he moved in with his girlfriend. He would eventually have a daughter with that girlfriend in 1985 and then marry her. Before them getting married, Gary, Larry, and a few friends made a cross-country trip to California, pitching tents to save money on accommodations during their adventures. Ass, grass, or cash.
That's it.
It's the rules of the road.
It is.
Later on, Gary would talk about this trip to investigators that were investigating Larry. And he said that at some point during the trip, they had found a girl and they had taken advantage of her. That's the way he described it. And they were doing that so it would be Larry's first sexual experience.
Oh, okay.
And he worried that might have something to do with what's wrong with Larry.
I think there's a couple things that explain what's wrong with him, but
listen, if there's a lot of things you can do with your siblings. Banging a woman together maybe is not one of them. Not to mention, we need consent, okay? No shaming if you want to be that woman in that. But if you did not consent,
it's not good.
It's not cool, man.
It's not.
It's how we get serial killers.
It is.
Okay. Gary would eventually bounce around jobs, even becoming a janitor. And then he got Larry a job being a janitor with him.
Cool.
But he did end up leaving. But Larry liked it so much, so he spent every night cleaning businesses like banks, shops. He even worked in factories cleaning at nighttime. He worked completely night shift.
I do too, Larry. I feel your pain. I do too.
The man who owned the business was Robert Heath, and he was a mentor to Larry. And eventually, Heath died, and all the clients were like, quick, we got to get Larry. He's a really good janitor. And so the Farm Bureau Credit Union rushed and made Larry an employee. So he would only report to the general manager, and he was so trusted that he didn't need to clock in or out. He basically just did his own fucking thing. He spent the days with his cranky elderly parents in a shack and his nights in empty banks. A bleak living, really. He would throw himself into his automotive hobby. He would drive the countryside looking for vintage Mopar parts and deals. He was also well known for being able to find the most unfindable vehicles and parts. Like, he would get Auto Trader magazine. Again, Google it if you don't know what it is. I don't have time. I don't have time. But he would go looking for these vehicles and would just kind of clock things on the way. I wonder if he has some kind of bit of like autism or Asperger's because of some of his behaviors and his hyperfixations on things and vehicle part. He's like, there was this one guy in the book that was talking like, oh, I've been looking for this part forever. And Larry would be like, oh, I saw it down the road down here the other day. Because that's really how he talked. In the late 80s, he found something he would love even more than old cars. Civil War reenactments.
I'm here for it.
He saw a 1986 TV program that drew him in, and in 1988, he joined a local group that portrayed the 19th Indiana Volunteer Regiment of the Union Army's Iron Brigade, who lost more soldiers per capita than any other blue company in the war.
Okay.
Real winners, you know?
We're going to model ourselves after the not heroes.
Most of the reenactments would happen in the Midwest over weekends, setting up tents on Fridays, and then the rest of the weekend in uniform doing drills, mock battles for the locals who would come to watch. Reenactors would create whole personas and made-up families fitting their characters from the 1860s, and this made it a little bit easier for Larry to blend in. In fact, Gary would join Larry for reenactments, and this would be the one thing that Larry did more effectively than Gary. Gary never took it seriously, but his charm made him real popular with him being promoted to corporal over Larry, which apparently he loved Gary so much that he didn't care.
First of all, none of y'all are real soldiers with real ranks. So stop telling me how you got promoted, okay?
You're like,
it's kind of an
what
insult
court?
to our true military and their promotions. That Bob here, who can really, twirl a bayonet, got promoted to a corporal. Get the fuck out of here.
He brought all those hot dogs last weekend. Don't you remember? He made sure we got fed. If that's not corporal material, I don't know what it is. The 19th was so authentic and looked so accurate that they ended up being asked to be extra in 2 Civil War films in that time. Glory, which was filmed outside of Atlanta in 1989, and Gettysburg, filmed in the Gettysburg area around 1992. Gary is seen actually scrambling down a hill in Gettysburg, and it's the only bit of footage of the twins in either movie. So it's just Gary. That's it. Filming Glory had been more rewarding to Larry. It was his first reenactment combat, he told a reporter of the Marion, Indiana Tribune. Marion is about an hour away from Wabash or whatever. They wrote an article about the filmmaking, and Larry was quoted actually throughout the whole article. From the pyrotechnics to the weapons, it took reenactment to a whole new level. It was like firework explosions, and the bayonets had real swords, whereas the ones that are in reenactment battles are often like brittle metal that really can't hurt. And he actually almost got stabbed in one of the reenactments by backing up into someone's blade.
I was just thinking, why would you put real daggers on there?
Because, why would you put bullets in a gun and use that on the set of Rust? I don't know. Ask Alec Baldwin.
Too soon. Is
it? I don't know such a thing.
What a traumatic experience.
When he was asked why he loved it so much, he stated it was like traveling to the past. While Gettysburg filming was more prestigious with better per diem and all, it did cause a rift between the twins. Not because of the filming, but because Gary had to bring a girl with him. Not his first wife, who he had already divorced a year after marrying, but his second, a redhead named Deirdre, and he had the audacity to bring a woman. And then say he couldn't share a hotel room with them. Oh. You telling me I can't sleep in my twin's room because you're busy with him, Deirdre? God. He would end up storming out of the room and took off in his van and just slept in the vehicle. Like, he was like, I can't even look at you.
Can't even look at your face.
The audacity. Much like their mother and Gary's first wife, Deirdre was very controlling, and it would be the last time the brothers took a lengthy road trip for a reenactment. From that point on, they would only jointly attend reenactments within a few hours from home, which is very important to note because his reenactments have a lot to do with what he does later.
Okay.
By October 1990, he grew sideburns, or as he would say, Burnsides, in hopes he would be promoted to play General Ambrose Burnside, a fellow Indiana native, who was well known for his prestigious and huge sideburns mustache combo.
When you said he was known for his huge, I didn't know where we were going there.
I knew you in there. He later discovered that Burnside was 6 feet tall and Larry was 5'4", so he would not be tall enough to play him. But you know what? It enhanced his authenticity for his Civil War look. So he said, you know what? I'm snatched and I'm keeping it. He was still an infantry sword, but he had his Burnsides. Thank you. I'm meaning my Burnside era. This change of appearance made him stick out much more in the day-to-day life and would actually help place him as certain reenactments by witnesses later on. Just because he was so... I mean, how many people walk around looking like that? Have the whole get and caboodle besides Jimmy. Jimmy did do it.
Okay, I was waiting for you to finish to say your husband.
Also, we're not entirely convinced that he's not a serial killer, okay?
We are not.
We are not. You call me Ann Rule with a stranger beside me, okay? He would attend many reenactments during the early 90s, even some that were Revolutionary War reenactments, where his Burnsides would make him stick out also, because they weren't really popular in that time. He attended many of these solo, and regardless of being Revolutionary War reenactments, he would always wear a Civil War uniform. It was like Bill and Ted got lost and took a Civil War guy back to the Revolutionary War.
He's just staying in character.
Yeah. Now that we've established who Larry was and his eccentricities, let's talk about Jessica Roach.
Nailed it.
I know, right? It's only 3 times a charm, baby. On September 20th, 1993, Jessica went on a ride on her new bicycle near her home in Georgetown, Illinois. It's in Vermilion County, Illinois. It's a tall, slender county, a couple hours south of Chicago on the Illinois-Indiana border. It's kind of out of the middle of nowhere. It's a little tiny town full of just farmers. The last time she was seen was around 3:30 p.m., and she was headed to the school to help work on the homecoming float that was going to be that weekend. The only trace that they found of her at that time was her bicycle, which she had just received as a present, laying on its side on a dirt road between cornfields. The 15-year-old high school sophomore remained missing for 6 weeks, despite extensive search efforts. When they found her bicycle, it was only 50 yards from her house, too.
Oh, jeez.
They said if it had not been, the corn had not been so tall, they could have seen her bike. But the corn had grown at that time of year, and it was about to be harvested. So you couldn't really tell what was going on.
Being abducted in a cornfield.
Children of corn? They did call in dogs, but they couldn't find a scent. So to me, that shows that, like, whatever happened, he picked her up right there and left, you know. Most missing teens were considered runaway back in the days of yore, but her family insisted this was not the case. She had no boyfriend, there was no animosity or any arguments in the family. If anything, she was excited for the homecoming parade that weekend. So it wasn't like she had plans to abscond and just, like, get the fuck out of here and let me hit LA or something. So Georgetown, being a very small town, they called in Vermilion County, and the chief investigator, Gary Miller, came on down to investigate. He was not familiar with the area, so he went driving around and he was seeing like it was all cornfields. And then when you cross over into the next state, which is Indiana, it's like a bunch of like ravines and forest and stuff. So he was like, oh shit, this is going to make this pretty difficult. He started to get around town to ask people about their whereabouts, alibis, you know, and it was already difficult because the family itself, Jessica's family, are Jehovah's Witnesses, and they're very anti-government. They don't like to have anything to do with the police unless they absolutely have to. So being questioned by them was already too much. While she had no boyfriend, she did have a few crushes. And so many people from her church community to her schoolmates were interviewed, and there were no leads. And they were able to eliminate all the usual suspects, including her father, who had to take a polygraph because he was the last one that saw her alive. So that finally narrows it down to being a serial killer, which is terrifying because you don't know what their motives are. You don't know where they're at. You don't know if it was a transient or if they live there. When a stranger is the killer and there is no connection, it's a million times harder.
For sure.
Especially with no witnesses. Despite their best efforts, on November 8th, Roach's remains were found 30 minutes east on a farm in Perrysville, Indiana by a farmer on his combine. I have heard of combine, but I don't know if you know what it does. I Googled it because I did have time that day.
I do, but educate everyone else.
A combine is a large piece of farming equipment, and its name derives from its combining 4 separate harvesting operations, reaping, threshing, gathering, and winnowing to a single process. Unfortunately, the combine had went over her body.
Ah.
And that's how he saw just like this mass on the ground after going over it. So he went over there and her head was completely detached and she was skeletal in some parts from decomposition.
Mm.
And so they took her to Terre Haute, which was where the state coroner's office is in Indiana. And they think she might have been strangled. Her jaw did look like it had been broken prior to death, but that's literally all they could ascertain just because the crime scene was just so corrupted.
That's sad.
Initially, the medical examiner in Terre Haute stated that this was not Jessica and not the body of a 15-year-old. Detective Miller was like, bro, this has to be her. And so another weird circumstance is that Jehovah's Witnesses usually don't also go to the dentist, I guess. And so she didn't have any dental records on file. But years earlier, a detective had come to the school and visited classrooms like they do nowadays, and they handed out fingerprint cards.
Mm-hmm.
And she had one that her mother had kept in her possession of the fingerprint of this little girl. And while they could only reconstitute one finger enough to compare, it was a complete match.
Mm.
The detective that brought those cards, it was Gary Miller, the one who was investigating her death.
Wow.
Crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was depressing.
It was. It really getting me down.
Sorry. I'll make it funny.
I signed up for this life. I knew what it was.
Shortly after, a witness came forward and said they had seen a man walking out of that cornfield where her body was found and that he left in a van. It was dark and he was not able to decipher the color of the van or any physical features of the person driving. He just knew it was a van.
I saw this guy. He had these huge ass Burnsides.
I'm farsighted, okay? For an entire year, there is no lead to what happened to Jessica, why she was in that field, who this man was. He even signed up for help from America's Most Wanted with no success. Despite all the signs of this becoming a cold case, Detective Miller persevered. He would read every report in his county that had to do with somebody being followed or whatever. And one day he comes across a report of 2 14-year-old girls being followed by a man in a van. What happened was these 2 girls riding on their bicycle in this van starts making gratuitous comments, say, let me give you a ride. And they get scared, so he chases after them, and they go through an alleyway that's too narrow for his truck to get through.
Good job, girls.
Got home, the father was like, oh, the fuck, this is happening. And he took the girls around the whole little town and looked for the van and were able to point it out, and they wrote down the license plate. And the license plate, when it was ran, was registered to Lawrence Dwayne Hall and had been reported in the area multiple times for the same reason. Cruising around, following young girls.
Jesus.
So, of course, Miller called Wabash PD to see about Larry, and he spoke to Detective Sergeant Jeff Whitmer, who readily stated he knew Larry and he'd grown up with him. It's a small town. Whitmer was the one who revealed the most important connection of Larry to these murders, which was attending the reenactment and his frequent travels around the state looking for parts. There had been a Revolutionary War reenactment local to Georgetown around the time of Jessica's disappearance. And that's a strong bit of circumstantial evidence right there. Despite saying he was a harmless weirdo, he did state that Larry had been a suspect in another missing persons case, that of Tricia Reitler.
Jesus.
So Tricia Reitler was a 19-year-old freshman at Indiana Wesleyan University in Marion, Indiana, which isn't too far from Wabash, like we said. She was studying psychology and had a desire to help broken families recover from their trauma. Like, literally, that's what she was just like a real smart gal working on her degree. One night, March 29th, 1993, she had been working on a term paper and she wanted to take a break. So she left campus around 8 p.m. and walked a half-mile away to the Marsh supermarket. She purchased a soda and a magazine before returning to her dormitory in Bowman Hall, but she never arrived. 2 days after her disappearance, they found Reitler's blood-stained pants, shirt, shoes between the store and the university, close to Siebold Pool, and Center Elementary School. Trisha was extremely athletic and a runner, which showed up in the police dog's tracking. So she more than definitely put up a fight. It was all over the place in this park. And the clothes were neatly folded.
Oh.
Trisha's body has never been found, and several people have been suspected in her disappearance, including Larry Hall. Police still consider a case open and active and are still looking for witnesses and any tips on her location. There were 7 unknown individuals witnessed playing basketball in the area where Trisha disappeared, and none have ever come up forward and made any statements of anything. So they're never found out those 7 people's identities, just that another witness said that they were there. What tied Larry to Trisha's abduction, though? Well, in May 1994 in Oil City, Indiana, just 10 minutes down the road from Marion, Larry was stopped by police for following girls in a van. Upon searching, they found a whole mess of suspicious shit like a spray can of starting fluid and a cotton mask, cotton balls, a plastic tarp, some knives, a length of rope, newspaper articles about Trisha Reitler.
Those aren't normal things to have on you?
No.
Oh, okay.
You better get them out of your vehicle if they are.
Well, I might need them. So.
I might need them. I see what you mean. Hall was later arrested by police and confessed to killing Trisha Reitler. However, he was later released after failing to find the place where he told the police he buried her. Like, literally took this man out into the woods, and he's like, I can't find it. And they're like, well, then you didn't do it. Then did you? And despite being, suspected, police in Wabash were like, Larry could never. And that him being weird is just a product of his upbringing, not an indication of being a murderer.
I mean, I like that mindset because just because someone's weird doesn't mean that. I do. You guys were just off on this one.
Yeah, very off. They said he was a wannabe serial killer at best. Which, I mean, true. Being weird isn't a reason to be suspected for a crime, but also being weird is not a valid reason to not investigate a suspect properly.
True. Especially if your follow-up description is a wannabe serial killer.
Yeah. If serial killer factors anywhere in that sentence, you probably should be a little bit more on guard. You know what I mean?
That is an adjective you use to describe somebody anywhere, that, come on.
I myself am a bit of a Poirot, an equal opportunity investigator, if you will, who suspects everyone. Everybody is a suspect.
You
okay?
all are guilty.
I'm in my Poirot era.
I've been in it for 40 years.
Yeah, right. This is the Becky era. Sorry, not Poirot. Regardless, Wabash detectives did set up an interview with Larry for Detective Miller. And this would be an extremely weird interview. So normally you would have them come to the police station, let me go in the room with the one-sided mirror, and, we're going to just watch behind the mirror. No, they the room's not big enough. So we're going to go across the street to City Hall, and we're going to use one of their conference rooms, and we're going to have every fucking detective in this police department, a detective from the county, and all these police officers sitting there watching this detective ask the suspect questions.
Must have been a slow day at the station.
I mean,
did they cater in lunch too?
Right. So Miller was like, this is not what I was expecting. I was hoping for a little bit more of an intimate scenario here. And they were like, oh, this is what you get. And he's like, fine, whatever.
I'd be like, too many people. I gots to go.
So he starts asking questions like, have you ever been to Georgetown? And he replied, no. And he said, well, what about your reenactments? He goes, well, I travel all over for them. It's possible for me to remember everywhere.
I'm a bit of a superstar, in case you don't know.
I don't know if you've heard about these things on my face. They call me Burnside. He also liked to look for parts. So he said, I could have been just looking for Dodge parts in the area. I don't know. I don't know if I've ever been there. And so Detective Miller pulls out a map. He's like, all right, can you show me on this map where some of these reenactments are? And he's like, oh, I think I do remember Georgetown. It had a little burger stand. It was really small. Stopped a few times, talked to some girls, invited them to ride in his van. And he was like, but you didn't chase anybody. He goes, no. No.
Sir, the hoes be chasing me.
And if I did, it would be just for fun. I was like, first of all, sir, I see you. It's not happening. If anything, Have you been to a Renaissance festival? You know how bad those smell? I'm sure Civil War reenactments are the same. No, thank you. No women are chasing after that. At least not this woman.
Or this one.
So they were still like talking back and forth, Detective Miller and Larry, when a detective goes, Larry, why don't you tell him about your dreams? And before Detective Miller could be like, what the fuck? He was like, yeah, sometimes I have dreams of killing women, but I think it's just a dream. And he wouldn't go into the specifics of the dream, just that he was doing bad things. Miller then took out a photo of Jessica, and Larry did that thing where you put your hand by your face, and you're like, oh my God, they might see me. Oh my God.
He was hiding behind his hand?
Yeah, he was like, put his hand up and like turned his head like he didn't want to. And it wasn't like a crime scene photo. It was just a picture of her. Like just a regular school photograph. And he was like, I'm not 100% sure that Larry had something to do with this, but this is telling me a lot. Okay. He's not a suspect. And the other detectives still doubted, that this was even a possibility, despite Larry getting in trouble that month for stalking a jogger and other women.
He's just a wannabe, though.
He's just wannabe. They were like, so what do we do with him? Oh, let's refer him to counseling services.
Of course.
Which he would not keep up with. Surprise!
Shocking.
But Detective Miller couldn't give up. There was too many similarity between Trisha and Jessica cases to just let it go. So on the way home, he was concerned about the abilities of the Indiana police. I mean, they're ignoring all the signs. Every sign. You want to see flags? Every one of them.
He's waving them at the Civil War reenactments, too.
And he knew the girl went missing from his jurisdiction in Illinois. He's an Illinois detective. This is in Indiana where they found her body. And Wabash is way up in the middle of Indiana. So at this point, you could start with that. You know how they did those turf wars police back in those days? Like, It's my case. No, it's my case. Like, bitch, do you not have enough to do? Like, what are you doing? So he was like, well, and these bitches aren't even doing their jobs right. You know what time? It's time for us to take it to a federal level.
Stepping it up.
This usually is a negative thing. They don't normally want the feds to take over because then you end up being extracted from this case that you've been working on, yada, yada. And murder itself is not a federal crime unless it's done during acts of terrorism. Crossing state lines, though, that makes it a federal. It makes it a bit of a federal situation. And Detective Miller knew and trusted the U.S. Attorney for the Central District of Illinois and contacted her to escalate the prosecution for Larry. He told her that Larry abducted and murdered Jessica in Illinois and then transported her body across state lines to dispose of it, thus rendering it under federal jurisdiction. Most U.S. attorneys are not familiar with prosecuting murders. Like there are lawyers who have specialties. It's usually a state case, for felony murder. But the good news is that the person that was assigned as a prosecutor in this case, Larry Beaumont, had previous experience prosecuting murders at a state level. So he was very well-rounded, and he was friends with Ken Burns, the FBI agent that was assigned to the Chicago area. So he was like, oh yeah, there's nothing that could deter me from making this decision. This is the right way to go. I'll still be able to be involved. We're going to get this motherfucker.
Good.
And Indiana ain't going to have nothing to do with it. And so now that the feds were involved, Detective Miller's got to play FBI ball. He was like, okay, I got this polygraph investigator that he'll come down from Chicago. He's a state investigator and he'll do it. And they're like, nah, dog, this is our shit. And our polygraph guy won't be ready for 2 weeks. So you're going to have to wait. So he had
Jesus.
Yeah, he's like sitting here like, I know this is happening. So he has to wait until November 15th, 1994. Larry was asked to come down to the police station to meet with Detective Miller and FBI agent Mike Randolph, which, you've seen in the movies where like, let's take a ride down to the station. The fact that they were like, hey, when you get a chance, come on down. Like, damn, Indiana.
We're on your time, Larry.
And so he was not even bothered by it. He was like, yeah, that's fine. I'll come on down. Didn't call an attorney, nothing. Just come on down. Miller is known to be kind of a brash, gruff guy. And Larry didn't really respond well to Detective Miller, but Randolph, the FBI agent that was doing the polygraph, was a lot softer. He was more like that stereotypical sitcom dad, and he could immediately tell that Randolph and Larry were
We're not
able to.
vibing.
They were vibing.
They were vibing. Okay.
And
Miller, he wasn't vibing.
No, he wasn't vibing. He knew he'd have to do this polygraph. He goes in with Randolph and Larry, and he starts handing him all these forms. And he's like, one's his Miranda rights. He reads them out to Larry. Larry reads them out, starts signing them, and then it starts going through all these like consent forms and stuff for polygraph and what it means and this, that. And Larry goes to read it, and then he stops. He's like, I can't do this. And the agent, Randolph, was like, well, why not? He's like, I don't believe I'll pass it. And so, like, you can't use that in court.
Right.
You know, polygraph is not something that's even used in court anymore anyways, on top of somebody saying that, like, a vague statement like that. But they knew, like, this is it. We're about to get it. And Randolph starts talking to Larry, and he sees Miller seeing that this vibe's going on. He's like, I'm going to go on outside and let him just keep working him, right? And he starts asking him questions. Larry starts to describe his dreams to Randolph and how they have been riddled by nightmares, inhibiting his sleep. You know, the women that were frustrating him in his life, this, that, and the other. They go on questioning for about an hour, and Rudolph was able to get Larry to open up and become more open than ever. He started saying that he was referred to a counselor by the detectives, and he went to that counselor, and the counselor's like, yo, dog, I am not equipped for this. And he was like, all right, bet. And so he's like, there was no help for me. And these are all like these feelings. I'm frustrated, and I don't even have a counselor or nothing. And I have all these urges doing things to women, and I can't do it, you know? And then Randolph, at the 1 hour mark, pulls out this photo of Jessica Roach again. And he does the thing where he shields his face again, and he starts crying. And Randolph goes, why don't we talk about that weekend? And Larry started to divulge it all. How he abducted her, what he did, how he disposed of her body, the people that were, you know, because they had other suspects in the case, people that looked like it was their fault instead of Larry's. And he's like, and they're pretty much taking credit. Like, and he was saying things that only the killer would have known.
Mm-hmm.
Randolph is like, he says he's willing to make a statement and write it. And Miller's like, fuck yes. So they start rushing, knowing that he's had that history of retracting confessions. And they're getting ready to go take his confession. And Miller pulls out a recording device, and the FBI agent's like, nope, that's against FBI rules. We cannot record confessions, which sounds like a bullshit rule.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Huh?
Why would you not?
I'm confused.
Yeah. So they ended up having to handwrite this whole statement just by Randolph's memory. And in their rush to do it, he was copying the format of another confession or statement paper. And so he wrote Larry Dwayne Daniels at the top. I, Larry Dwayne Daniels. And so when Larry goes to sign it, neither of them are paying attention to that it's not the right name. Larry also signs it, Larry Dwayne Daniels.
Jesus.
But he doesn't sign it like a signature. He signs it like a 2-year-old block writing, you know, like, so it's not a signature. Which to me, either he was so slow that he would have just went along with that, or he's more devious than you give him credit for.
I would say probably half and half.
Yeah. Like, that's very weird that he picked up that it said Daniels and you wrote, like, you're...
But these detectives didn't.
Exactly. Neither of them noticed. Made the confession kind of a wobbly thing, because the very next day, of course, he retracted his confession. I was just telling you guys my dreams.
I didn't sign that. Larry Daniels did.
These were just my dreams I was telling you guys. Why do you have to take it so... Why are you obsessed with me?
So serious.
After the confession and he signs it, Miller's like, okay, now we can record things. Let me go back in there and start asking him some more questions. See if I can get more stuff to draw out. And he goes, bring out a recorder. And Larry's like, I don't ever want to hear my voice saying those ugly things, so we're not going to record it. So he has to be reduced to writing notes for the rest of that stuff. But all that stuff really was incriminating to him. And for him to retract all that made that case like completely just about circumstantial.
Mm.
after the interviewing all day, and this whole ordeal starts like November 15th and ends November 16th at 3 a.m. when he's booked in for murder. So this is like hours and hours of confession and talking to these detectives, and he's been crying and wringing his hands and going through all this horrible stuff. And Detective Whitmer put his hands on his shoulder and was like, Larry, it's gonna be all right. And Larry's like, no, it's not gonna be right. And it's never gonna be all right.
I'm going to jail, so things are not all right.
Like I said, he recanted the next day. His family probably had something to do with it. They were very protective of him, especially his brother Gary. They're like, he could never. He could never. Regardless of recanting, they did conduct a search of Leary's vehicle and home. Like I said, his parents were hoarders, and he had 2 fans. One of them was just full of junk, just full of a bunch of bullshit. The other one completely cleaned out, sparkling clean, like smelled like chemicals clean.
Of course.
And but he didn't take everything out of it. They found a couple of interesting things, like a birth control bottle belonging to another alleged victim, which I'll talk about in a second. And then there were handwritten notes describing his actions in the spring of 1993 when Tricia Reitler disappeared. Larry had written describing us stalking women outside the grocery store where Tricia was last seen at. Quote, seen joggers and bikers, many alone. Check colleges, parks, seen some prospects. There was also a to-do list that found things such as cut out stained carpet, burn paint tarps, buy new handsaw blades, clean all tools, buy 2 more plastic tarps, cover all floor and sides of van, no body contact, buy condoms, buy 2 more leather belts, find one now.
That's not suspicious.
No. So, like, he had some solid things in there, but that birth control, that was the weird thing.
That was the weird thing? None of the rest was.
No. The weird thing about the birth control is that birth control doesn't usually come in a bottle.
It does not. I was thinking that when you said it, I'm like, birth control doesn't come in a bottle. But
usually comes in bubble packs.
This was, a different time.
Right? And they called all the pharmacies in the area, right? Looking, like, did this come from this pharmacy? Because it was really a shoddy kind of like label on it, and not a single pharmacy had a prescription for this girl for birth control. He was suspected in her murder, but I don't think he had anything to do, and that maybe that would be something he was trying to kind of claim or had fantasized about but didn't follow through. That's where I think he's getting murky on it, This girl, her name was Raina Rison. She was a sophomore in high school. She was 16 years old at the time of her death. She and her family had lived in LaPorte, Indiana. March 26, 1993, Raina left work at the animal hospital and disappeared. She's supposed to be meeting with a boyfriend. There was evidence that he may have been in the area at the time of the disappearance, but that's there's no words. It's not really solved or any of that. That's the sad thing.
So she went missing and they found her birth control bottle in his van.
Yes. So they suspected it was a forgery. They did solve his case. I'd missed that note. They did solve it. They believe that her ex-boyfriend, Jason Tibbs, did it, and he was found guilty and is currently serving a prison sentence for it. But I mean, the pill bottle is the only thing that really connected Rison to Larry Hall. But these other notes, it's like he had to have been doing something.
Right.
That's confusing to me.
It is to me too, because I don't see how you're like, some random person he didn't know he had their prescription bottle in his van, but he didn't do it.
Yeah.
Like, how do you have that then?
Curious
minds want to know.
How peculiar.
And then you're like, did this other guy who's serving time, did he really do it? Or is he an innocent man there just...
Damn it, man.
Yeah.
And there was a couple times where people were prosecuted in crimes that he was suspected in. So that's not the only one. That's the sad thing. So investigators also found newspaper clippings about Jessica Roach and Tricia Reitler amid pornographic photos that Hall had altered. Like, he had drawn, like, them naked, their bodies naked on, like, a head or something. And, like, he was doodling grotesque things.
Cutting pictures of the newspaper out of their faces and putting them on the porn.
Right.
Creepy.
The case was solidifying before their eyes, but it wouldn't be long before they realized it wasn't as solid as they realized. And that's where we're going to pick back up. Thanks
for leaving me on a cliffhanger.
We're going to talk about...
Just getting juicy.
You wait till the next one, because the guy that helps in this situation, his name's Jimmy Keene. And when I was writing, it was like, Jimmy, 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 Jimmy.
Oh, not creepy. Sorry.
Until next time, find us on our socials, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat. Check out our merch. Let us know your own Too Close to Home stories. We'd love to hear about those. Don't forget to rate and subscribe on all the platforms that you might listen to, or just every platform if you have the time. Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Pandora, all those things. Rate and subscribe to your girl. Well, until next time,
Stay safe.
keep your head on a swivel.
And don't bring it too close to home.
That you forget everything.
Everything. Almost my name.
Almost my name. We're entering our Burnside era.
We are.
Bye. If you enjoyed this episode of Too Close to Home, don't forget to rate and subscribe to us on most platforms. Follow us on our social media at Too Close Home Pod on Facebook, at Too Close Podcast on Instagram, or if you have your own Too Close to Home experience, shoot us your story at tooclosetohome@yahoo.com. Thanks for listening.